sur les populations autochtones. Commissaire Solomon Derso, vous avez la parole pour 20 minutes. Ensuite, les États qui souhaitent intervenir sur ce rapport auront 5 minutes chacun. Pour les ONG et les commissions nationales des droits de l'homme, ils ont 3 minutes s'ils souhaitent intervenir sur ce rapport. Commissaire Derso, vous avez la parole pour ce rapport. Merci.
Thank you very much, Chair. Very good morning once again, colleagues. I would like to present the intersection activity report of the Working Group on Indigenous Populations, /communities and minorities in Africa, covering the period 20 October it wouldn't be 20 October, it must be from April to 09 November. The report is submitted in accordance with Rule 25(3) and Rule 64 of the Rules of Procedure, the 2020 Rules of Procedure of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, as well as Section 3D of the Standard Operating Procedures of the Special Mechanisms of the Commission. It highlights the activities carried out during the intersession period after the 71st ordinary session of the Commission held virtually from 21 April to 13 May 2021. It includes activities undertaken by the chairperson, commissioner members, expert members of the Working Group on Indigenous Populations, Communities and Minorities in Africa. The first activity that we have carried out relates to the commemoration of the 20th anniversary of the Working Group. This was an activity conducted in the course of the 71st ordinary session of the Commission, during which the Working Group hosted a panel discussion, which provided an opportunity for stock-taking of the 20 years journey of the Working Group on Indigenous population /communities and minorities, and also reflected on the state of the work of both the Working Group as well as indeed the human rights of indigenous populations, communities as well as minorities. It gave obviously an opportunity for various members of the Working Group as well as the representatives of indigenous communities and minorities to share their perspectives and insights on the 20 years journey of this Working Group and the contributions that the Working Group made both to the jurisprudence of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights and to the expansion of the enjoyment of the rights and freedoms by indigenous communities and minorities, but also to indeed our understanding on the continent and globally of what the protection and defense of the rights of indigenous peoples and minorities entails in the African context, as it were. As chairperson of the Commission, the Working Group, I also was able to engage the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples during the Africa Regional Dialogue. The third activity undertaken relates to a press release issued on the evictions affecting the Maasai people in Tanzania. This was issued in June 2022. As the chairperson of the Working Group, upon receipt of information on forced eviction affecting the Maasai community, we issued urgent call for cessation of the eviction of the Maasai community in the Ngorongoro district in the United Republic of Tanzania. I'm sure in the course of this session you have heard some of the interventions reflecting on how this is a continuous concern for the affected communities. The press statement among others, call for an immediate cessation of such arbitrary and violent acts, the conduct of proper investigations by the state authorities, adequate compensation of the victims as applicable, and an inclusion of the Maasai in the decision-making processes relating to the land on which they depend. I take note of the statement delivered by Tanzania before my arrival, providing response to the state of affairs from the perspective of the government of Tanzania. I very much welcome that, and I consider that other basis for continuous follow-up and engagement in order to address the continuous concern from the Maasai community in the Ngorongoro district, particularly as it relates to access and use of their land, as well as protection from violations by security forces, and indeed the implementation of the other aspects of the statement that we have issued, including particularly the investigations and the full participation of the communities in decision-making processes. In the course of the intersession period, as you all may know, the African Court on Human and People's Rights handed down its judgment on reparations with respect to application number 006-2012, African Commission on Human and People's Rights versus the Republic of Kenya concerning the Oge case. Within that context, we issued a statement highlighting the Commission's anticipation for Kenya's cooperation in the implementation of the Court's judgment on reparations. This case, which deals with the rights of indigenous communities, falls within the mandate of the working group and had also been keenly followed by the working group. Consequently, in the statement also served as an opportunity to address the significance of the decision from the point of view of the mandate of the working group. I wish to note that in my statement, I emphasize the significance of the judgment and, most importantly, its implementation in the light of upholding the rights of the people of Kenya, the Oge community in particular, and indigenous populations across Africa. I also underscored the relevance of the judgment in its ability to hold policy organs of the AU as well as member states towards respecting their obligations to implement the decisions of the African Court. I would like to reiterate to Kenya to kindly extend their full cooperation for the implementation of the judgment of the African Court, which would enable Kenya to ever incrementally expand the scope of protection and enjoyment of human rights, particularly by the most marginalized sections of society, thereby fulfilling the aspirations contained in Kenya's Constitution of 2010. On 4 October 2022, we also issued a press statement on various human rights violations against the Bennett Mosopesky community in the Republic of Uganda. This was after receiving reports on the various acts of violations, including violence, intimidation, threats, destruction and confiscation of property, and forceful eviction of the community in and around Mount Elgon region in Uganda. This press statement noted that the violations have allegedly largely been perpetrated by the members of Ugandan Wildlife Authority in the process of enforcing a 1993 government decision establishing the Mount Elgon National Park, and that they have recently escalated in the months of June to August 2022 after the community organized peaceful assemblies to reclaim their land. It's worth noting that the implementation of conservation processes on the African continent have increasingly become a site for the displacement and eviction of indigenous groups and minorities, and this is affecting many people, particularly marginalized communities across the continent, and it is one issue that this commission needs to be seized with as a very increasingly a very increasing area of concern that actually manifests the collusion of international private actors who would like to have a piece of territory on the African continent with governments that would actually engage in the creation of these conservation areas. In the statement, we drew the attention of the government of Uganda to the Commission's resolution 489/2021 on the recognition and protection of the rights of participation, governance, and the use of natural resources by indigenous and local populations in Africa, which emphasizes the rights of indigenous populations and communities over the conservation, control, management, and sustainable use of their natural resources, as well as the duty of states to take necessary measures to strengthen their participation, that is the participation of indigenous populations, in such governance processes. In the statement, we called on the government of Uganda to ensure cessation of all forms of harassment or violations against the indigenous Bennett community and guarantee their safety and security, undertake investigations into alleged violations meted out against the Bennett community, and indeed implement effective reparations to the victims and their families, as well as ensuring that they are able to continue to access their land and territories as well as the resources therein. We have, as per the requirements of the Commission's procedures, invited for new membership for expert members, and this is something that that is being finalized and indeed adopted in the course of this session. We have also initiated, on the basis of decisions that have been taken at the level of the working group and that of the Commission, particularly Resolution 455/2020, which was adopted during the 66th Ordinary Session of the Commission, initiated a process for the implementation of this resolution as it relates to the study for on issues affecting minorities in Africa, which provides for collaboration with stakeholders. And in this context, we have established a technical relationship with Minority Rights Group International for purpose of taking this decision of the Commission and assignment to the working group forward. In this context, of course, I held a planning meeting with MRG to discuss the modalities and roadmap for the conduct of the study in line with the Commission's established best practices for developing soft law instruments as well as the studies. I wish to thank all the stakeholders that have contributed to the process leading to the execution of this arrangement, particularly the Secretariat. I wish to thank the acting STC as well as my colleague Abiola for facilitating this. Presentations on the work of the Working Group and the African Commission. On 17 August, on the invitation of the Center for Human Rights, I participated in a course delivering a lecture on the right to development and free, informed and prior consent of indigenous peoples during the annual course on the right to development held at the University of Pretoria. This obviously served as an occasion for discussing with participants and popularizing the work and jurisprudence of the African Commission as it relates to FIPC and the right to development of indigenous peoples. Furthermore, on 20 August, I delivered a presentation at a roundtable held at the University of Pretoria, focusing on climate change, human rights and development in Africa. The presentation used the lens of and drew on the work of the African Commission, including its working group on indigenous populations communities, as well as the other working group that I chair, that of extractive industries, environment and human rights violations. An expert member, Dr. Belkacem Loans, has participated in the steering committee of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. This high-level event to launch the Decade of Indigenous Languages will take place on 13 December 2022 at UNESCO headquarters in Paris. As in other regions of the world, in Africa, indigenous representatives, states, academic institutions, NGOs, UNESCO and local offices, and other public and private partners will meet in November in Morocco to develop the African Action Plan for the Decade of Indigenous Languages. I take this opportunity to urge states to take an active part in this meeting in order to contribute to providing Africa with its action plan for the safeguarding and promotion of African indigenous languages, many of which face a threat of extinction. Now, brief overview, Chair, of the situation of indigenous communities and minorities in Africa. During the intersession period, the working group monitored the situation of indigenous communities and minorities in Africa and noted the following. In Kenya, as mentioned above, I issued a press statement welcoming the judgment on the reparations of the African Court on Human and People's Rights with respect to the OGEC. It's worth noting that the court issued its reparations judgment in which it ordered the government of Kenya to compensate the OGEC with a sum of Kenya shilling 57,850,000 Kenyan shillings for the material prejudice suffered and 100 million Kenyan shillings for the moral prejudice that the OGEC community suffered. To guarantee full recognition of the OGEC as indigenous people of Kenya, including through full recognition and protection of the OGEC languages and the OGEC cultural and religious practices. It also requested the adoption of legislative, administrative, and or any other measure to avoid non-repetition of the violations that the OGEC endured. I will continue to monitor the implementation of this decision in my dual capacities as the Commissioner Rapporteur for the OGEC case, that is country rapporteur of Kenya, and indeed as a member of the working group moving forward, as I would be passing the role of chairing this working group to another member of the Commission. In Uganda, we have already made reference to the violations meted out to the Mosapeki community in eastern Uganda that I made reference to. In the Democratic Republic, before I move to the Democratic Republic of Congo, the working group remains concerned about the disregard of the rights of indigenous groups and minorities by member states, which continues to prevail even after due recognition in constitutional provisions and court judgment issued by these states themselves. This relates to particularly the conditions that I've made reference to in Uganda. Democratic Republic of Congo, on 10 June 2022, DRC's parliament took a remarkable step in adopting a bill which recognized the customary rights of indigenous population, specifically the Batwa peoples, also known as the Pygmy. DRC has an approximate indigenous population ranging between 600,000 to 1.5 million in number, mostly occupying the Congo Basin forest. The Batwa, who are mostly found in the Kahuvi Biga forests, have suffered some of the highest forms of marginalization, discrimination, forced evictions, and even attacks and killings in their land reclamation struggles since the demarcation and creation of the National Park of Kahuvi Biga in 1970. This bill specifically guarantees the following: access to justice for indigenous peoples, a duty of the state to recognize the traditions, customs, and practice of indigenous peoples, and to take appropriate measures to facilitate the enjoyment of their rights, including with strategies to tackle their historical marginalization. Although the bill has been criticized for not making any provisions on strategies for land restoration, reparation, or compensation, the working group notes that this is a laudable step in advancing the rights of indigenous peoples in the DRC. Nonetheless, the working group looks forward to quite an inclusive approach in the implementation of the protection strategies envisaged in the bill by the government, effectively catering for not just future needs of indigenous peoples, but also importantly providing compensation for damages and violations that they have already suffered, including as it relates to their right to land and the territories in which they live. In Tanzania, reference have already been made with respect to the case of the Maasai indigenous communities in the Ngorongoro district, to which we have made reference, and we continue to appeal to the government of Tanzania to ensure full protection of the rights of the Maasai communities in the Ngorongoro district, particularly as it relates to the dispute over the land. Finally, in Algeria, the working group recalls the letter of urgent appeal was sent to Algeria on 27 September 2021 regarding the effects of COVID-19, particularly on the Amazinga indigenous populations. The arson attacks in the indigenous territory of Kabylia, the repression against the Amazinga, to which no response has been provided up to date, and observes that the repression against this community, particularly the Kabylia community, has been accentuated in recent years, with 300 members currently imprisoned without trial, some for 2 years. The working group also notes the Kamira Nati Sid, co-president of the NGO Amazinga Congress, has been detained for more than 30 months in an arbitrary manner, according to the opinion of the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. We therefore urge Algeria to respond to the letter of urgent appeal that the working group communicated. Conclusions and recommendations, Chair. To the government of Kenya, as I indicated earlier on, one of the issues that we would like to have a close follow-up on is the implementation of the OGEC decision by the African Court, and of course, the previous decisions relating to the Indorese communities as well. To the government of Uganda to implement the request that we have made in the statement that we have issued. To the government of the DRC to work towards an inclusive application of the new indigenous law on the rights of the Batwa peoples, ensuring a guarantee of their rights in protection strategies, as well as the award of reparations when violations do occur. To the government of Tanzania, we have expressed commitment to cooperate with they have expressed commitment to cooperate with the African Commission, and we look forward to this cooperation and indeed to take the measures that we have outlined in our statement. To Algeria, we look forward to receive the response to the urgent letter of appeal that we have communicated. To national and international organizations, the working group extends its sincere appreciation for the support that it receives from its partners in the execution of its mandate, and calls for continuous collaboration and unrelenting commitment to the efforts of promoting and protecting indigenous and minority rights on the continent. In this regard, to supplement the current work that the working group receives from partners including EU-GEA, MRG, GEA Foundation, and the African Biodiversity Network, I wish to take this opportunity to invite further support from other organizations working on the rights of indigenous communities and minorities in Africa to provide financial and technical support and indeed advocacy for the implementation of the various initiatives with respect to the protection and promotion of the rights of indigenous populations and communities in Africa. I thank you for your kind attention. Over to you, Chair.
La Commission remercie le commissaire Solomon Aile Derso pour son leadership et surtout pour la présentation de ce rapport pour le groupe de travail sur les populations autochtones. Je voudrais me tourner du côté des États. Est-ce qu'il y a un État qui souhaite faire un commentaire sur ce rapport? Il n'y a pas. Je voudrais aussi... Il y a l'Algérie? D'accord. Je ne vois que l'Algérie. Madame la représentante de l'Algérie, la République d'Algérie, vous pouvez prendre la parole sur cette question.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je tiens tout d'abord d'exprimer mes félicitations au président du groupe de travail sur la population Et permettez-moi, Monsieur le Président, de souligner quelques observations relatives aux efforts déployés par l'État algérien pour affirmer l'unité du peuple algérien avec l'égalité d'accès aux droits sans aucune discrimination à cette minorité. Aussi, il faut souligner que l'Algérie a mené des efforts pour la promotion de l'enseignement et de l'utilisation de la langue amazigh, composante fondamentale de l'identité algérienne, aux côtés de l'islam et l'arabité. Ça est formulé dans l'article 4 de la Constitution qui stipule l'amazigh est également langue nationale et officielle. L'État ouvre à sa promotion et à son développement dans toutes ses variétés linguistiques en usage sur le territoire national. Sur ce sujet, également, une académie a été créée et placée auprès de Monsieur le Président de la République, qui est chargé de la promotion de la langue tamazight. Sur l'appel et la lettre envoyée par Monsieur le rapporteur spécial droits de l'homme en Algérie sur la protection des personnes affectées par les feux de forêt en Algérie, on a envoyé une réponse le 3 octobre 2022 qui explique et donne des détails sur ces personnes affectées et les efforts déployés par l'État algérien pour promouvoir et protection de ces personnes. Merci.
Nous remercions la délégation d'Algérie pour ces observations. Y a-t-il encore un État? Oui, le Kenya. Madame de la délégation du Kenya, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Kenya would like to exercise its right of reply in respect to the statement made yesterday by the Ogek People's Development Program and those of the chair of the Working Group on Indigenous Population, Communities and Minorities in Africa made today. Honorable Chair, we wish to place on record that the government of Kenya respects the decision of regional human rights mechanisms and has always endeavored to the best of its ability to implement them. In 2022, the African Court on Human and People's Rights delivered a reparation judgment on a case brought by the Ogek people against the Kenyan government. We assure the commissioners that the government is in the process of studying the decision with a view of addressing the matter in a holistic and inclusive manner. Indeed, the Constitution provides for that the government must take affirmative action to improve the lot of marginalized persons in Kenya, and government has formulated various strategies to this end. In formulating any strategy, government must consider its own internal budgetary and policy processes and timelines. It is further noted that the judgment carries with it financial implications, which then trigger public finance management processes, which must be strictly followed. These include the approvals by the National Treasury and Cabinet. The National Assembly must ratify the decision, which is very critical insofar as appropriation of funds for expenditure by the national government is concerned. Admittedly, all these processes take time. We, however, assure the commissioners that Kenya recognizes and takes seriously its obligations to protect and promote human rights for all people in the country, including the Ogek. I thank you, Honorable Chair.
Merci beaucoup. Y a-t-il encore une délégation qui souhaite intervenir sur ce rapport concernant le groupe de travail sur les populations et communautés autochtones? Non. Je passe la parole aux institutions nationales des droits de l'homme. Y a-t-il une institution qui aimerait faire un commentaire? Une institution nationale des droits de l'homme qui souhaite faire un commentaire sur ce rapport? Si vous êtes là, vous levez le drapeau, le flag, si vous voulez voir. Je ne vois pas. Je vais passer la parole aux ONG. Y a-t-il une organisation de la société civile dans la salle qui aimerait intervenir au sujet du rapport présenté par le commissaire Solomon Aele Derso? Là-bas, je vous donne la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, honorable Président de la Commission africaine des droits de l'homme et des peuples, honorables Mesdames, Messieurs les commissaires, distingués délégués. Je prends la parole en tant que membre d'une organisation autochtone, malgré que j'étais inscrit sur la liste. Et étant du groupe autochtone, je profite pour faire ma présentation parce que ça va dans le sens du rapport qui vient d'être présenté par l'honorable commissaire.
Un instant. Si vous voulez intervenir maintenant, c'est au sujet du rapport d'abord, mais si c'est pour la déclaration en tant que ONG, vous attendez à la fin.
Dans le même sens que le rapport, donc je ne reviendrai plus pour intervenir, sinon, parce que le travail ou ma présentation, c'est sur les questions des peuples autochtones.
Allez-y, mais vous n'avez que 2 minutes selon les règlements.
Honorable Président de la Commission africaine, nous pouvons dire que le travail de la Commission africaine a été couronné de succès depuis plusieurs années en matière de la promotion des droits des peuples autochtones et surtout la création du groupe de travail sur les populations autochtones et les communautés autochtones. Cependant, même à l'époque, il était manifeste qu'il s'agissait là que la première étape et surtout sur un chemin long et chaotique. Cette prévision s'est avérée, Monsieur le Président, fondée car, à peu près 2 décennies d'existence, les défenseurs des droits des peuples autochtones continuent à batailler pour convaincre les États, principales parties prenantes dans l'applicabilité du concept de population autochtone et d'existence des populations autochtones sur le continent. Le rapporteur a souligné les cas de violation des droits des peuples autochtones sur les Maasai en Tanzanie, au Kenya, avec les Ogiek et la situation en République du Congo, surtout sur la situation conflictuelle qui touche les communautés autochtones qui ne connaissent ni les issues et les aboutissants de ces conflits. Cependant, d'autres cas de violation des droits de l'homme peuvent s'observer, notamment au Burundi, où il y a eu des cas d'assassinat extrajudiciaires dans les provinces de Karusi, Chibitoke, Kirundo, Ngozi et Kayanza. Tous les battoirs tués sont accusés de cas de vol dans les champs et les auteurs sont arrêtés pour une petite période jusqu'à pour calmer la famille des victimes. Monsieur le Président, les peuples autochtones ont salué et ont toujours travaillé avec le groupe de travail sur les communautés autochtones. Cependant, nous restons préoccupés par l'élargissement de son mandat en y ajoutant la question des minorités qui est vue comme une diminution du travail de la Commission, du groupe de travail de la Commission sur les droits des populations et communautés autochtones sur le continent. Ainsi, nous saluons la collaboration de la Commission avec les autres mécanismes internationaux sur les droits des peuples autochtones, dont l'instance permanente des Nations Unies sur les questions autochtones. Et l'honorable commissaire a cité déjà la participation dans la session de l'instance permanente. Nous avons, en tant que membre de l'instance permanente, je voudrais lire ici la recommandation qui a été émise par l'instance permanente et je vais la lire dans la langue anglaise qui est la version originale de cette...
Soyez bref, s'il vous plaît, posez la question directement.
Bref. The Permanent Forum welcomes the decision of the African Commission on Human People's Rights to promote and protect the rights of indigenous peoples on the African, and welcomes the inclusion of the minorities within this working group. While recognizing the importance of rights of persons belonging to the minorities, the Permanent Forum is concerned that the expanded mandate could compromise the current Commission standards for promoting the rights of indigenous peoples. The Permanent Forum therefore urges the Commission to establish a separate working group on minorities' rights. The Permanent Forum calls on the Commission to work closely with indigenous peoples, representatives from Africa, and united entities to highlight and advance the recognition, rights, and participation of indigenous peoples at the regional and national levels. Furthermore, the Permanent Forum recommends that the Commission designate